Trust October lecture. Few words about, I will first introduce the group and its activities, and then Mr. Kannan will give a introduction to the speaker, and then we will have the lecture of the day. Tamil Heritage Trust was founded in 2008 by தமிழ் பாரம்பரிய அறக்கட்டளை 2008 ப்ரொஃபஸர் சுவாமிநாதன் அவர்களாலும் பத்ரி சேஷாலும் திரு அண்ணாமலை அவர்களாலும் நிறுவப்பட்டது. இது வந்து ஒரு தமிழ் கலாச்சாரம், இந்திய தமிழ் பாரம்பரிய அறக்கட்டளையும் பேசுகிறாங்க. இந்திய கலாச்சாரம் பொதுவான பாரம்பரிய இல்லை பாரம்பரியத்தை தாண்டி ஏதாவது விஷயம் இருந்தாலும் பொதுமக்களுக்கு ஒரு குழு, ஒரு இடம், ஒரு நிறுவனம் வேண்டும் சொல்லி ஆரம்பிக்கப்பட்டது. இதில் வந்து மாதாந்திர சொற்பொழிகள், மந்த்லி லெக்சர்ஸ் எல்லா மாதமும் முதல் சனிக்கிழமை அன்னைக்கு சாயங்காலம் 5:30 மணிக்கு சாதாரணமாக அந்த ஹால்குள்ளே நடக்கும். இன்னைக்கு சாயங்காலம் போட்டு ஸ்பெஷலாக அன்னைக்கு நடக்கும். இது ஒரு முக்கியமான நிகழ்வு. இது வந்து மாதம் நடந்துட்டு இருக்கு. இந்த மாதம் நடக்கிற நிகழ்வுல அறிக்கைகள் வந்து இமெயில் மூலம் எல்லாருக்கும் அனுப்புகிறோம். ஸோ நீங்கள் ஒரு பேச்சு அவருடைய சொற்பொழிவு ஆரம்பிச்சப்பமா ஒரு நோட்பேட் அனுப்புவோம். அதில் உங்கள் பேர் இமெயிலை குறிச்சிட்டிங்கன்னா உங்களுக்கு அந்த சனிக்கிழமை பேச போகிறாங்க. திங்கக்கிழமை அன்றைக்கி அந்த நிகழ்வு வந்துடும். இதை தவிர எங்கள் வெப்பேஜ் ஒன்று இருக்குது, tamilheritage.in, tamilheritage.in அப்படிங்கிறது. அதுலேயும் இந்த அறிவிப்பும் வரும். பேசி முடிச்சிருக்கோம். ஒரு 1-2 வீக்ஸில் பத்ரி சேஷாத்ரி ரெக்கார்ட் பண்ணுற அந்த வீடியோஸும் அப்லோட் பண்ணுவோம். நீங்கள் அதையும் பார்க்கலாம். ஸோ என்னுடைய ப்ரீவியஸ் 5-6 வருஷத்தோடைய சொற்பொழிகளுடைய வீடியோ ரெக்கார்டிங் இன்னைக்கு ஆரம்பிச்சோம். ஃபர்ஸ்ட் 4-5 தவிர எல்லாத்தையும் ரெக்கார்டிங் அதையும் பார்க்கலாம். இந்த டாபிக்ஸ் என்ன அப்படின்னா, ஸ்பீக்கரை பொறுத்து, இன்ட்ரெஸ்ட்டை பொறுத்து, யாரை கூப்பிட்றவங்களை பொறுத்து, கலை, ஓவியம், மொழி, இலக்கணம், ஆர்கியாலஜி, தொல்லியல், ஆர்கிடெக்சர், விஞ்ஞானம், இந்த மாதிரி எந்த மரபு இருந்தாலும் எதை பற்றி பேசணும் சொல்லப்பட்டாலும் பாரம்பரியத்துக்கு, தமிழ்க்கோ இந்திய பாரம்பரியத்துக்கோ ஒன்று இருந்த ஏதாவது ஒரு தலைப்பை சம்டைம்ஸ் எக்ஸ்பர்ட்ஸ், சம்டைம்ஸ் என்தூசியாஸ்டிக் அமெச்சர்ஸ் வெளியே கூப்பிட்டு நாங்கள் பேசுகிறோம். அதை வந்து அதில் பிஹெச்டி பண்ணி 40 வருஷம் அனுபவம் இருக்குன்னு இருக்கலாம். ஒரு முதலாக உங்கள் ஆர்வத்தினால ரொம்ப அதிகமாக அதை பற்றி தெரிஞ்சுக்கிட்ட அப்புறம் பேசலாம். அந்த மாதிரி நிறைய பேர் பேசியிருக்காங்க. நீங்களும் ஒரு நாள் பேசலாம். இது முதல் நிகழ்ச்சி. ரெண்டாவது வந்து வருஷம் ஜனவரி மாதம் நாங்கள் சைட் சீனிங் நடத்துகிறோம். ஒரு 5 வருஷம் போயிட்டோம். 2010 மகாபலிபுரத்துக்கும், 11 அஜந்தா எல்லோரா, 12 புதுக்கோட்டை மாவட்டத்தின் சில பாரம்பரிய சின்னங்கள், 13 ஸ்ரீரங்கம், 14 குஜராத்தில் பல இடங்கள், பல ஊர்களுக்கு போயிருந்தோம். இந்த வருஷம் போக போகிறோம். அதை நாங்கள் மேக் அனௌன்ஸ்மெண்ட் லேட்டர். ஸோ இந்த சைட் சின்னதான்றது என்னென்னா, கலை உலா, ஒரு பர்டிகுலர் இடத்த எடுத்து மகாபலிபுரம் மாதிரி ஒரு இடத்த எடுத்துக்கணும். மகாபலிபுரம் காலையில் போயிட்டு மத்தியானம் சாயங்காலம் வந்துடும். அதை ஒரு ஆழமான அதை பற்றி ஒரு அனுபவம் வேணும். அதில் என்னெல்லாம் இருக்குது, அது என்ன, அதோடைய வரலாறு என்ன, அந்த சிற்பக்கலையோடைய பேக்ரவுண்ட் என்ன, இல்லை சிற்பம் வேணால் அந்த இடத்தோடைய முக்கியத்துவம் என்ன, வரலாற்று முக்கியத்துவம் என்ன, சம்பவங்கள் என்ன, இது எல்லாத்தையும் பற்றி நான் படிச்சுட்டு தெரிஞ்சுட்டு எங்களுக்குள்ளேயே சில வாரம் சில மீட்டிங்ஸ் போட்டு அதை பேசி கலந்து டிஸ்கஸ் பண்ணி அது ஒரு மாதிரி ஒரு 6 to 10 வீக்ஸ் பேசிட்டு அதுக்கப்புறம் நாங்கள் இடத்துக்கு போவோம். இது வந்து ஒரு ஆழ்கலை விழா அப்படின்னு சொல்லி சைட்ஸ். மூணாவது டிசம்பர் மாதம் கடைசியில் கர்நாடக சங்கீதம், பரதநாட்டியம் ஓரளவுக்கு கொஞ்சம் பிரபலமாக இருக்கிற அந்த பாட்டு கச்சேரி டைமில் பேச்சு கச்சேரின்னு ஒரு கான்செப்டை ஒரு 3 வருஷமாக பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கோம். பேச்சு கச்சேரினா இந்த மாதிரி மாதாந்திர சொற்பொழிவு வந்து வெவ்வேறு டாப்பிக்கில் இருக்காங்க. அது ஒரு ஒருங்கிணைத்த ஒரு பர்டிகுலர் சப்ஜெக்ட் எடுத்துட்டு ஒரு 5-6 பேர் 5-6 நாள் பேசுகிற மாதிரி 1.5 hours 1 to 1.5 hours ஒரு லெக்சர் நடத்தும். அதுவும் ஒரு 3 வருஷமாக பண்ணியிருக்கோம். போன வருஷம் ஸ்ரீரங்கம், அதுக்கு முந்தின வருஷம் இந்திய கலை கோட்பாடு, ஓவிய கோட்பாடு, பெயிண்டிங் ஹிஸ்ட்ரி அப்படிங்கிற காலத்து, அதுக்கு முன்னாடி ஒரு வெரைட்டி ஆஃப் டாபிக், சிற்பக்கலை, ஓவியக்கலை. ஸோ இது 3rd ஆக்டிவிட்டி. 4th ஆக்டிவிட்டி இதெல்லாம் அடல்ட்ஸுக்கும் கொஞ்சம் ஒரு எஜுகேட்டட், ஒரு நல்ல ஒரு ஸ்ட்ராங் பேக்ரவுண்ட் இருக்கிற மாதிரி இல்லைன்னா குழந்தைகள் இருக்கிறவங்களுக்கு சம்மர் மாதத்தில், மே மாதத்தில் ஒரு வீக்கெண்ட் இருக்குது. சாட்டர்டே சண்டே 2 நாள் பள்ளிக்கூட மாணவர்களுக்காக, ஒரு 7 வயசுலேருந்து 15 வயசு வரைக்கும் ஒரு பள்ளிக்கூட மாணவர்களுக்காக ஒரு 4-5 ஆக்டிவிட்டி, ஒரு லெக்சர், இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு ப்ரோக்ராம் இருக்கும். சம்மர் கேம்ப் அப்படின்னு சொல்லி இது 4 ஆக்டிவிட்டி. இந்த 4 ஆக்டிவிட்டியும் எங்களுடைய வெப்சைட்டில் எல்லாம் இருக்கும். எங்கள் சைன்அப் பண்ணுறவங்களுக்கும் ஒரு இமெயில் அனுப்பிடுவோம். சேர்ந்துக்கலாம். ஸோ வித்தவுட் மச் ஃபர்தர் ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Kannan to introduce the speaker of it.
சமயம் சான்றோரும் இயேசுபிரான் தொட்டிருமாகிய அருள் திரு டாக்டர் ஆனந்த் அமல்தாஸ் அவர்களை நம்முடன் அவருடைய அகாடமிக் ரீதியான விஷயங்களை பகிர்ந்து கொள்வதற்கு அழைத்ததற்கு நாம் தான் முக்கியமாக மகிழ்ச்சி அடைகிறோம். ஆனால் இந்த கூட்டத்தின் முடிவில் உங்களுக்கு ஏதேனும் ஐயங்கள், சந்தேகங்கள், தெளிவுகள் பெற வேண்டும் என்றால் நீங்கள் தமிழ்தான் ஆங்கிலத்தில் தான் கேட்க வேண்டும் என்பதில்லை. ஜெர்மன் மொழியிலும் கேட்கலாம், லத்தீனிலும் கேட்கலாம், கிரீக்கிலும் கேட்கலாம். இதுதான் அவரை பற்றிய முதல் அறிமுகம் என்று நான் நினைக்கிறேன். ஜெர்மன் மொழி, லத்தீன், கிரீக், ஆங்கிலம், வழக்கமான சம்ஸ்கிருதம், இந்த மொழிகளை மிகவும் கற்று துறை போட்டியவர் ஃபாதர் அமல்ராஜ் அவர்கள். இவர் ஆரம்ப காலத்தில் சென்னை லயோலா கல்லூரியில் இளங்கலை கிராஜுவேட் ஆங்கில இலக்கியம் பயின்றார். பிறகு தத்துவமும் பயின்றார். ஆனால் தன் மேற்படிப்புக்காக தேர்ந்தெடுத்த துறைகளில் அவர் முக்கியம் கொடுத்து முதுகலை பட்டம் வாங்கியது சம்ஸ்கிருதம். சம்ஸ்கிருதம், பிலாசபி, தத்துவம் இவற்றிலெல்லாம் அவர் முதுகலை பட்டத்தை பெற்றிருக்கிறார். அவற்றை தொடர்ந்து சம்ஸ்கிருதத்தில் ஆராய்ச்சி பட்டமாகிய பிஹெச்டியும் வாங்கியவர். அதைத் தொடர்ந்து பின்னால் போஸ்ட் டாக்டரல் ஸ்டடீஸுக்காக பட்ட மேற்படிப்பு, ஆராய்ச்சி மேற்படிப்புக்கு மேல் சென்று அவர் வியன்னா போன்ற அகில உலக தளங்களில் பயின்றும் பயிற்றுவித்து இருக்கிறார். வியன்னா பல்கலைக்கழகத்திலேயே ஆராய்ச்சி மேற்படிப்பை தொடர்ந்து அங்கு உலக தரத்தில் உலாகக்கூடிய அறிஞர்களுடன் பயின்றும் அவர்களிடம் ஆராய்ச்சியும் பண்ணார். பிறகு அதே வியன்னா பல்கலைக்கழகத்தில் ஆசிரியராக வந்து பயிற்றுவித்து இருக்கிறார். தம்முடைய சமயக்கல்வி சார்பாக வாடிகளிலும் பயின்றும் பயிற்றுவித்து இருக்கிறார். பிறகு திண்டுக்கலில் தான் அவர் தன்னுடைய லத்தீன், கிரேக்கம் என்ற மொழி சார்ந்த படிப்புகளை தன்னுடைய சமய கல்வியின் சார்பாக பயின்றார். அதோடு மறுபடியும் குறிப்பிட வேண்டும், அவருடைய மொழி இறையியல் கல்வியாக, அவர் சமயம் சார்ந்த கல்வியாக தியாலஜி, இறையியலிலும் முதுகலை பட்டம் பெற்றவர். ஆனால் இவரை அறிஞர் என்று அறிமுகப்படுத்துவது தவறு என்று நான் நினைக்கிறேன். இது பெரிய ரசிகர். எங்கெல்லாம் கற்றுக்கொள்ள வேண்டிய விஷயங்கள் இருக்கின்றதோ அங்கெல்லாம் அமைதியாக, ஓரமாக, கூட்டத்தோடு கூட்டமாக அமர்ந்து அந்த கற்றுக்கொள்வது வந்து ஒரு ரசிகராக இருப்பதை பலரும் பார்த்திருக்கலாம். எப்பொழுது யாராவை கேட்டு நம் அப்பொருள் மெய்ப்பொருள் காண்பது என்பதையே நோக்கமாக வைத்துக் கொண்டு தன்னுடைய இருப்பை வெளிப்படுத்திக் கொள்ளாது கூட்டத்தோடு கூடமாக ஒரு ரசிகராகவே இருக்கிறார். ஸோ ஒரு அறிஞர் என்ற தளத்தில் இன்று நம்முடைய அழைக்கப்பட்டிருந்தாலும் கூட நாம் அவரை ஒரு ரசிகராக பார்க்கிறோம். பொதுவாக இலக்கிய விமர்சனம் என்பது மேற்கு திசையிலிருந்து, வெஸ்டர்ன் கண்ட்ரியிலிருந்து நமக்கு அறிமுகமான ஒன்று என்றுதான் நினைத்துக் கொண்டிருக்கிறோம். அதைத் தொடர்ந்து இந்த நூற்றாண்டில் இந்திய மொழிகளில் கடந்த 50 ஆண்டுகளில் இலக்கிய விமர்சனம் என்று பெரிதாக பேசப்படுகிறது. ஆனால் இந்த இலக்கிய விமர்சனங்களுக்கெல்லாம் அடியெடுத்து வைத்துக் கொடுப்பதாக நம்ம நாட்டிலேயே அறிஞர்களின் பங்கு இருந்திருக்கிறது. ஆனந்தவர்தன் எழுதிய கான்யாலோகா, பக்ரோதி ஜீவிதம், இது போன்ற நூல்கள் இலக்கிய விமர்சனத்துக்கு வேறொரு புதிய பாங்கில், வேறொரு புதிய தளத்தில் இந்தியாவிலேயே நமக்கு காண கிடைக்கக்கூடிய சான்றுகளாக இருக்கின்றன. ஸோ அந்த ஆனந்தவர்தனின் கான்யாலோகாவில் இருந்து தொனி என்ற கான்செப்டை, இந்த கொள்கையை அவர் எப்படி அணுகுகிறார், அதற்கும் மேற்கத்திய உலகத்திற்கும் இன்றைய இலக்கிய ஆராய்ச்சி அல்லது கலை ஆராய்ச்சி இல்ல இலக்கிய விமர்சனம் அல்லது கலை விமர்சனத்திற்கும் தொடர்பு படுத்தி பேசுவதுதான் அவருடைய முக்கிய நோக்கமாக அமையும் என்று நினைக்கிறோம். ஸோ அறிஞராக இருக்கக்கூடிய அருள் திரு ஆனந்த் அமல்ராஜ் அவர்களே, அவருடைய இலக்கிய அனுபவங்கள் ரீதியாக இந்த தலைப்பை அணுவார் என்று நம்பியும் கேட்டுக்கொண்டும் அவரை வரவேற்றோம்.
ஆங்கிலம் தெரியாதனால தமிழ்ல பேசல, தமிழ் தெரியாதனால ஆங்கிலம் பேசல. ஏற்கனவே கேட்ட தமிழ்ல பேசுமா ஆங்கிலத்தில் பேசுமா அப்படின்னு சொன்னாங்க. தமிழே பேசுங்க அல்லது படிக்காவலத்தில் பேசுங்க, எந்த மொழி பேசினா பரவாயில்ல சொன்னாங்க. முதல் காரணம் வந்து சில பிலசாபி கான்செப்ட்லாம் நுவான்ஸோட பேசுறதுக்கு எனக்கு சொல்ல எடுக்கப்பட்டார். அதனால தான் ஆங்கிலத்தில் பேசுகிறேன். தேங்க்யூ வெரி மச். for inviting me for this meeting. I'm happy to present this. I have lectured on this topic in several occasions and to several audience, published several articles, but every time it's different. Today I try to interpret it differently for this audience. I do not know you. I'm happy that I have occasion to talk to you. I'm happy to get your questions, feedback, that I can rethink again about my own understanding of this. I'd like to thank Mr. Khanna for his nice introduction. But when you praise too much, it makes me nervous. I wonder whether I can measure up the expectations of the audience. But first of all, I do not know. We'll go back to the subject. Afterwards, we can interrupt me, ask me questions. You know, how many of you have read this text, Vanya Loka, or heard about it? Definitely you have heard about the text, not necessarily you have read the text. In MA at the university level, this text is taught. But what they do is, they teach only the first 2 chapters, leave out the philosophical part of the 4 chapters. See, now it happens. But this is very, very powerful concept, in my opinion. I'll tell you why. And practically every Indologist in Europe has read at least one article in Vanya. It is translated in German. I know I have a copy of that. It's also in Russian. Of course, in English there are 2 translations. And all the European languages are taken in. But that's not the point for us. For us it's very significant, not because it's poetic, aesthetic, and beauty, it's also philosophical language. See, the compartmentalization as in Europe is different from us. You see, for example, psychology is discussed in aesthetics. You see, if you do the doctorate to the Sanskrit department, they won't allow you to go to the psychology department, they tell you. But here, many things are combined, you see. Anyway, that's a different point. Now, what I'm trying to do is see, we are influenced by several factors. We speak several languages. And thus, we are subtly somehow taken up by other cultures. We are not aware how we have become succumb to another system. Why I see, you see, we are Indians. We dress like a particular way. And we eat with hands, not like chopsticks or fork. But I wonder whether we really think and act like Indians. You can challenge to act, you can question me. I'll give a reason again. So my talk is structured in 3 parts. The first part, informative level. I'll explain what is Vanya as the text of Anandavatna. The second part, I try to interpret the text. Right? So implications of this money concept in today's context of intercultural philosophy interpretation. This is my contribution. When you don't like that, I'll tell you later. The third part, why do I do this? What is the relevance of this type of meetings, this type of exposition of money? That will be our challenge. I'll tell you that. Now, we go by the first part. I thought it's better to have the text in hand. See, each slide we can talk for 1 hour. That makes more sense. I made a complete summary so that you have an idea. First, what is Dhwani? See, the very word, you can see that Dhwani literally means sound in modern Hindi. Dhwani DJ, right in the body, passes and all. But in grammar, it means a phoneme, partnered syllables. But in aesthetics, we call it suggestion. Suggestion is very prosaic in English, let's speak of. So I use the word evocation. It evokes. The kavya that evokes. Kavya translates literature. Kavya includes also prose, after the poetry. So that's why the word Nilma. You know, Anandavardhana is a 9th century Kashmiri. He wrote this text in Sanskrit, on which I did my doctorate. And you know the very word Vanya Loka, Vani Aloka, Aloka means flash of suggestion. And Abhinav Gupta, who came 100 years later, 10th century man, he wrote a famous commentary on this and became a standard work. He made it popular. And Abhinav Gupta is a great Tantric philosopher, Kashmiri scholar, and Alankarika, we call it, aesthetician. And his work even now stands as the standard work and made it very popular. Afterwards, everybody talks about Dhwani. Now, I give the Sanskrit meaning, but is it not available in Tamil tradition? Somebody will ask. Yes, it is. There is nothing new about it. You know, in the Tamil tradition, it is called Iraichi. Tolkapiyar refers to that, you see. It's called Ullurai. You know, it's called Aingilai. A.K. Ramanujan, you know, he is the one who translated these Tamil books in English, very popular. And viewers, they all know these texts, you see. Our Patapatra, all those classical English translated. And this man did a great service. But he died quite young. So he translates this Aingilai, Tinai, as interior landscape. You know. So there's nice book, interior landscape, I think. So they call the fivefold division of the land, Nilam, you know, Kurinchi, Mulai, Garden, Pari, you know that. This is all ecology. They explain the subtle shades of the land, you know, that's what it means. Now, the trouble is, and the difficulty is, there is no need for reference to these two traditions. The Tamil authors never refer to Sanskrit text. The Sanskrit authors never refer to Tamil. This is one of the problems the scholars face. How is it Anandavartana doesn't refer to the Tamil tradition at all? Because earlier than Anandavartana. But Anandavartana says by Purvacharyas, there are many others have said it. What does it mean? We do not know. But the only classical text that made Dwani theory popular is Anandavartana. I mention this not because something unique in their Dwani theory. This phenomenon Dwani is available everywhere, every culture. What is unique then? For Anandavartana, he is the first one to formulate a theory around this, how language evolves. That's why, you know, before atom was split, you know, things became according to laws of physics. But the moment atom was split, we know how to manipulate it, how to arrange differently with the maximum out of it. That's why Anandavartana says, I wrote this in order that you know how to compose poetry and appreciate poetry. There's a famous Satkaviyam, Kartumva, Yatumva, those who know Sanskrit people. I don't quote those things. I look up my capacity. Sometimes people get annoyed when I quote things, don't I show off. And it's not showing off, but I'm trying to substantiate the Anandavartana's claim that he's trying to help us to appreciate poetry. So this is available also in other cultures. So this is very important for us to understand this. Why I try to bring in also the Tamil tradition, it's available, but I'll stick to one area, otherwise too much rambling won't help us, okay? Now, what's the scope of Tamil? In the first two chapters, talk about the nature of Dwani, several examples, and defines what is Dwani, etc. But the third chapter enters in discussion on a philosophical level with our Mimamsakas, with our Nyayyikas, the Karmelians, you see. It's a very long chapter, but very important. I'll come back to it later. The fourth chapter gives an illustration of interpreting. It brings in Mahabharata. Very strange, it's very strange, and he interprets it. That's why I bring in hermeneutic also here, because Anandavartana has given already an example. He didn't use the word hermeneutic because it is not in English, it was in Sanskrit, so that's the purpose of it. Now, a little bit of some notions about art and beauty, otherwise we'll be talking too much of philosophy. We also know that. You know, the whole discussion in the Indian poetics, Alankara Shastra we call it, what constitutes beauty in the language of Kavya? That was the question for discussion. In response to this, several theories of composition arose. Some said Alankara can make something beautiful. You know. Some said no, it's a repeated style. By the theory of Achara, that is beautiful. Some said it's Vakrokti. Vakrokti means crooked saying, you know, indirect way of saying. It's only Vakrokti Jiviram. It's a famous word, we know that. So they said, then of course Dwani. They said that Kavya se Atma Dwani. Read the Atma Kavya se. So they always define like this. There are several theories of composition arose in Sanskrit poetics. Now, what terms are used to denote art and beauty? You know, Alankara means literally beauty. Alankara, Saundarya, Alankara, already Bhava defines it, it's true. But Alankara, the very word contains, you know, Alankaroti, we define the word. Alam means enough. That means you only enough, that much, not more, not less. Only that is beauty. You see, it's proportion. When somebody is beautiful, a simple dress, a simple chain, to add in the neck full of things that is clumsy. When you do that much things Latin, somebody will refer to that. I'm not speaking Latin. There's a perfect phrase, equivalent of this, tantum quantum, we say it. You take only that much you need, not more, not less. That is pure. Tantum quantum, we say in Latin, as a matter. Sorry to be embarrassing you. Okay? No. So that is precisely the beauty, but the kanti is an important word, very popular word from the root come, to love, to long for, even sexual connotation. It combines several values, aesthetic values like decoration, desire, loveliness, splendor, light, etc. all combined together. Very difficult to translate one English word, it's very difficult. But I'd like to, in parenthesis and practical, tell you, see the concept of beauty, this Indian tradition, is deeply rooted in typical feminine qualities. See? A notion unpopular in many circles today. That's why I don't give examples. Why? But then to gloss over it is to miss the great point of our Indian tradition. Don't throw away the baby along with the bathwater. Kama Sutra is not the only text to talk about. Because once I gave a lecture in the Cross University, for the teachers, one lady walked out when I quoted the example from the Sanskrit. So I didn't mean to hurt anybody. So I stopped quoting such kind of things. I think one example to explain that. But I don't know what sort of audience I have, so I have to be careful. So things have changed. I know different days have used my deny that. But because it's not prepared, the tradition, the charm and beauty is always properly feminine qualities described. There is something positive to be seen, not always negatively to be brushed aside. That's my side comment. Now come back to art. See, art is not defined in the Alankara Shastra, strangely enough. I found a translation on Agni, several scholars know it. In Aitreya Brahmana, there is a nice definition of what is art. Art, the kala which we use now, is a modern word. Only we can, Kama Sutra, first time we have in 6th century, is 8 years so. We have 64 kalas enumerated in the Kama Sutra. But the point is, the earlier word is shilping, shilpa. In the Vedic time, shilping, the artist, you see. So the definition Aitreya Brahmana gives is shilpam chandoma. Atmana Samskriti, that's the purpose. Shilpam chandoma which means that which is endowed with cadence, proportion, metrical order, propriety, harmony. You see so many words explain chandas. You know what is chandas? You all know that. This is one of those ancillary sciences we call Vedantas, we call it. Chandas. You see, it's not really meter, there are two translations. See, when a chant gets Lora, the poem, chant, you may not put a meaning, but the cadence captures, you see. This precisely was called chandas. They were not counting the syllables. They thought in vertical form. So this precisely chandas. So this definition could be applied to poetry, painting, dance, music, or the art in general. The purpose is to do the second part of the definition, Atman, Samskriti, to cultivate oneself, to refine oneself. So that would be just to, not to leave out like that, you see. Now, more on Bani itself, where I have. An example I give, without giving to what Ananda Vartana example, there are some Prakrit verses, mostly related to the boy-girl relationship, etc. That may not be the lifetime for us here. I'll give an example. See, Lakshmi, young girl, sits in front of the house. Her grandmother, who went to the market, comes back and tells Lakshmi, it's already getting dark. Lakshmi gets up and lights the lamp. Now, if you analyze this sentence grammatically or linguistically or semantically, Lakshmi, it is getting dark, does not mean switch on the light or light the lamp. But Lakshmi understood what the grandmother meant. The relation between grandmother and Lakshmi, and the time in which it is said, and the way in which she said, the intonation with which she said, Lakshmi understood what grandmother meant. This is called you communicate something not directly to this, to that, something evocative. So this is precisely what Dhwani is all about. Normally, in our traditional philosophy, Naiyayikas, for example, they wrote 14 factors which determine the meaning of a sentence. There's a long discussion on philosophers do that. The speaker and the spoken to, the relation between these two, the place in which it was said, the time in which it is said, the intonation with which it is said, all the they wrote determine the meaning of the sentence. See? For example, Kaku says something, intonation means, you see, I know you are the most virtuous person in the whole campus, I know. My sentence says you are the virtuous person, but my intonation negates that sentence, you see. So that mostly when we quarrel people there, we use body language, you see. You know it quite well. So this is nothing uncommon. This day-to-day experience of all of us. We all see what is running in that sense. Because, I give another example. Exeter, the German scholar, gives this example. He says the beauty of Helen. She wrote an article, Exeter on Dhwani, and he gives an example of Dhwani quoting Homer's epic. The war between Troy and the Greeks, and they fought for 10 years after Helen was abducted by Paris. And after the war is over, she refuses to come back with the whole story. And the soldiers on the seashore discuss the beauty of Helen. They say, all of the troubles and the war is worth it. That's all. He said, that is what he says. Homer is not describing Padari he described all of them like to describe just one sentence. That the soldier discussed the beauty of Helen. So this is also another example of how Dhwani is at work. There are several examples on the practice. There's no need for us to go into that. Now, I'll slowly move over to the context in which this concept is introduced in the Dhwanyaloka, in the third chapter especially. The philosophy of language is very important. Mainly it began to interpret the scriptures. They developed language because some sentences did not make any sense at all. Doesn't mean anything. What does it mean? They're studying hard to explain that. So, for example, Abhita, the first word, is called primary meaning of the sentence. You don't have to use that. Or literal meaning. The meanings of a name, that's enough. You don't need to go further. Because just like shoot an arrow, depends how much velocity force you give to that, the arrow can reach that end. You don't need to bring all the other functions. You see, that was Vemana's positions. But Anandavata says no. You see. But then already the secondary meaning, Lakshana, is also well known in Shankara, although they use it very much, because the primary meaning is sometimes incongruous. Some of the very sentences are not really consistent. But the Vedas cannot be wrong. But it's not the right meaning. So having access to secondary meaning when the first primary meaning is incongruous. That's the purpose. So now the point is, there's a third function, Anandavata introduces, we call Vyanjana, that is called evocative dimension here. So, this whole philosophy of discussions, people are fighting over this. Now, I'll give an example, which Anandavata himself gives. Ganga and Gosha, which means a hamlet is on the river Ganga. That's the Sanskrit phrase, which is named by Anandavata himself. What does it mean? See, literally cannot be true. How can the village is located on the river Ganga? Cannot be. So incongruous. Then we look for second meaning, namely, it is so close to Ganga, you can say it's almost on the river, you can say that. It's second meaning, Lakshana. Now comes, why should the author say like this? Can't he straightaway say that it's near Ganga? No, we call it. The intention of the author is to evoke something else. What is closer to Ganga? In Indian context, Ganga has a special sacred meaning. So it evokes the atmosphere of sacredness, calmness, etc., etc. That's why the poet says Ganga and Kusha. For an American audience, it might evocate the idea of fish, it can mean something else. You see? That depends on your background. So, but for India, people have great regard. They understand what is Ganga. It's not like near the river anywhere. It means something else. So, the point is, the primary meaning is incongruous. It already goes to the secondary meaning. Now comes the purpose, intention of the author. What does the author say, etc., etc. This is how Dhwani functions. Just an example like that, is it? Now, there's other factors. There are other factors related to Dhwanyaloka. See, Dhwanyaloka deals with how Kavya is to be interpreted, appreciated, judge, classified, evolved, experience, that I already mentioned that. Now we discuss what is good poetry. On various, there are some Chitrakavya, which doesn't evoke, there's no name at all. The Kavya should evoke. If it doesn't evoke, it's only dead, like that. Then he talks about factors that evoke the factors that hinder. There are many hindering factors. Then the fitness of the efficient reader, he calls Sakravaya. Kavi is the poet, Sakravaya is the efficient reader. The whole discussion goes on, which we don't go into detail. Okay? We don't need that. Now comes the second part. This so far I told information from the text. Okay? Now I will interpret. So implications of this Dhvani concept. What do I do now? I try to bring in some Western notion of symbol. You see? I am trying to say that Dhvani is a homeomorphic equivalent, is a phrase used by Raymond Panikar, which means there's a functional similarity between symbol and Dhvani. I am not identifying it. There are nuances granted, differences granted, but there is something which is similar. In that sense, I am bringing in some examples. Now, before what is hermeneutics, I have to explain. You see, what is hermeneutics? Because the word today is very popular. Many of the Western philosophers think hermeneutics is all philosophy. Heidegger, Aldrich, they are all experts. They are all talking about that. So now I am bringing in those reflections to explain what is Dhvani in our context. So the Hermes is in Greek mythology is the messenger of the gods. Gods always talk in any kind of language. Somebody has to interpret it. He is supposed to be interpreting it. That's why it's called from there. The word hermeneutikos means the hermeneutic, interpret, comes to mean interpretation. So we say hermeneutics, we mean principles of interpretation. Now this is what I'm going anyway. I will give 9, you can make it 12, you can 10, that's 9. 9 I enumerate, so that you know what I mean by this, okay? Now first of all, Dhvani operates through a sign which points beyond itself into through what it denotes. The Dhvani doesn't operate in the abstract. There's a difference between sign and symbol. Sign is only one-to-one relation. Table means table, chair means chair, nothing more. If you bring table, somebody brings something else, there's confusion. You must definitely define the dictionary meaning. But then, symbol has one-to-many relation. For example, take water, H2O. Okay? But in a certain situation, water has a symbol of vitality, thirst, in different conditions. In a tsunami affected situation, water is symbol of depth and destruction. But in a religious context, water means also the purification process. In a poetic context, they talk about dance and music of water. So it's not simply H2O, it varies. So that's precisely the sign is simply one-to-one meaning. So, but then symbol can operate only through a sign, but points beyond what it denotes. It's not really H2 is more than that. So that's what. So it is at work. Another one, I'll give you an example, because the Imam Sarkar Sinaya is quite different. Look, why do you need this function? You're taking fuss about it. You don't need it. You are Ganjaratho, you don't need it. And he says no, because Dhvani is not really restricted to linguistic phenomena, it goes non-linguistic phenomena. For example, the musical sound can also evoke. It's not a word. A dance gesture, a mudra cannot evoke, it's not even a sound. So you cannot say that Dhvani includes only the language, because they are, our Mimamsakas are specifically experts. They know how to use the language. That's how he refused that. So it's one of the reasons why Dhvani cannot be reduced to linguistic field alone. So I'm using only Anandavad as an example. This is one of the points which is important when talking about symbol and Dhvani. Okay? Now the second, you see the two, Anandavad presupposes that language basically evokes. It has an evocative dimension, which he calls Vyanjanatva, besides the primary and secondary meaning. This capacity is attributed to reality itself. This power is said to be inexhaustible. The Prakriti, that is Anandava says, that Prakriti, the famous Prakriti category in the Sankhya philosophy, Is inexhaustible. It's evolved all the time. This is in the category and uses that. Even other spirits like poets, thousands of them, sanitaries composing poetry, they can't exhaust it. If the Rasa, Kalidasa exhausted the meaning of love, why should people, poets today compose poetry and love? It's always like that. There's a big discussion. Such kind of discussions is very much alive in the West, Gadaba. They analyze the language. Gadaba says there is infinity, endlessness related to language. See, now I stop speaking, not because language is exhausted, I have nothing to say, or I am tired, I can start all over again. Language is not exhausted, just like the play. Play is not over. I finished basketball playing because I am tired, and I can start all over again. So we compare the big discussion in the West between language and the characteristic of language as endlessness. Which, even the Indian category of mythological language, like a prakriti, inexhaustible. So I'm just showing the functional similarity between these two phenomena. Another example of this. Third theory. But it goes beyond the intention of the author. This is one of the points the Western scholars have so enamored about it. They talk very much. Namely, the Dvani function may coincide with the intention of the author. I quote Abhinav Khandelwal himself, I am just fabricating it. Because it could be Abhipraya Rupa or Anabhipraya Rupa. This is very simple Sanskrit. So, for which Mamata, who came later, gives an example. Khandelwal doesn't give this example. He gives the example of Gatosta Bhattara, the sun is set. It's a phrase. Mamata says Kali Parasha. And he says, it can mean many things to many people. For example, Gatosta Bhattara would mean the religious-minded people is stand between the Sanyavana, medium time, okay? It would mean for a soldier is stand to attack the enemy, normally attack, night only the attack enemies, okay? For the lovers, it would mean it's high time to go outside the village, behind the bush to utter sweet nothings to one another, that kind of thing. So this is Mamata's example to show how this can mean many things to many people depending on your background. So it's not really intention of the author, So the basic insight of Anandavattara points to the nature of language, which realizes itself in the tension between the expressed and the evoked. Heidegger uses the phrase revealing and concealment. See? They also do the same language. That's why what is uttered, written down, does not limit it to the intention of the author. Today Shakespeare comes and says, look, I meant only this. Thank you, Mr. Shakespeare. But your words mean more than that today. We can say that. So this is a whole discussion today on this particular point of why the word means something like that. See, many people, the author of the text cannot say, I meant only this, nothing more. No, more than that. Some claim they understand better than the author himself today. This is not exactly compliment, although how do you know that? Many people go too much in the extreme. This is rather, this whole discussion saying we don't have to put them here. I'm only pointing out Anandavattara refers to this idea which is found in symbol language in the hermeneutic discussions in the West. Now we go to this point. Fourth point. As a result, Dvani mode of communication provides scope for discovering newer significance. This newness or beauty is due to the tension between what is revealed and what is hidden. The other decorations required, for instance, are external factors, which have no value in themselves unless they stand and act ego significance. Now, I'll go a little more. The fifth one, the Dvani way is not optionally extra. They say Dvani is only poetically, eloquently to say something. It's not so. Ananda says it's much more like that. Certain things, essential things in life cannot be expressed in denotative language. We can only use, the best they use limit experience, you see, religious experience, transcendent experience. This cannot be said in the denotative language. In newspaper, yes, descriptive language. But certain fundamental religious experience you cannot express in this language. That's why it's not optional extra. It's nature. For example, that's why many prophets spoke in parables. Buddha spoke in parables. Jesus spoke in parables. Ramakrishna is several parables. But in the religious realm, easier to communicate to parables than descriptive or denotative language. And we do have experienced such things, you see. For example, if you experience something deeply personal, I don't know how to say it, but I felt it's real. But it must be something like this, something like that. This is very hard, it's nothing out of our experience. So this is precisely what it means when you talk about money, it's not just a fun, a beauty, decoration. It's not like that. Sometimes the Upanishads say, the famous sentence, words fail, the mind cannot grasp it. Because it's not just a joke. Certain things cannot be expressed in words. Language is also limited. Now, we come to next point, 6. One mode of communication also demands certain decorum, certain harmony, certain appropriateness, propriety, because auchitya, there's answer. Uchita means proper, means noun out of that auchitya. The opposite would be anauchitya, something command. It's because aesthetic sensibility, which is an attitude to life in general, interprets outlook on the world, which is part of the formation of the artist, and readers therefore interpret the text. This is a very important concept because very often it's misunderstood, especially in our country. It's very much, I'll give an example under himself. See what it means. See, today, for example, the United States gives several instructions if you can't undress on the stage. Not because it's ethically wrong to undress. You should go to the bedroom, not on the stage. You see, it's mistakes. It's a propriety, it's sensitivity, lack of decorum. This is a word that is assumption we call it. It's not like a sabah, do someone else. So the whole thing, under the criticism of Kalidasa is strongly in his work. He says because Kalidasa must be a great man with 1,000 merits. There's something wrong with that fellow, he says. Because he lacks vyutpatti. You know what is vyutpatti? Discerning ability, sensitivity. Because in Mahasamava, the story of Mahasamava is married to Shiva and Parvati. 5th canto, marriage takes place. And the 7th, 8th canto describes the love making of Parvati and Shiva in human terms elaborately. He says, look, this is rubbish. When you describe the love making of your father and mother, something wrong with you. Shiva is your father. Okay, you can't do that. So this precisely illustrates what is auchitya, what is vyutpatti. You need this vyutpatti comes from Abhinav Gupta, uses the word. Vyutpatti, if you see the Sanskrit dictionary, they would say craftsmanship, the technique. No, it's more than that. It is the discerning ability, the aesthetic sensibility. That is vyutpatti, which is missing in Kalidasa says Anandavata. Now, the other point is important. It's the preparedness on the part of the reader. This appropriate form, this appropriate, you need. See, we cannot understand without wanting to understand. See, the kind of anticipation of meaning carries an effort to understand from the very beginning. All understanding, like all interpretation, is continually oriented to another posing the question by what it aims at. Consequently, it never without presupposition. In philosophy, we say the question presupposes an answer. You see, when you ask a question, there is some idea what the answer. Supposing you ask me a question, how was the answer yesterday? And I say, it's milk make honey. Come on, rubbish, you will say. Why? You have some idea about the answer. My answer doesn't correspond to that. Not exactly. The same way, suppose I ask you, how many miles long is 1 hour? Come on. Question. Because you know what is space, what is time. That question is missing up. So the idea is, you know something about the answer, preparedness of this. On the other hand, they call Western countries, they call pre-understanding is needed. You want to teach somebody. You can't teach the Eskimos without computer chips. They won't understand what you're talking about. Maybe the modern Eskimos are not computer, I don't know. But normally, you need certain background. It's called pre-understanding to understand this. Otherwise, you cannot communicate. So, this is precisely what both I talk to Sagardev for. Preparedness is very important. How one is prepared for this. This very, very important concept. Now we come to 8th one. Because of this preparedness on the part of the reader and the sympathetic openness, what results is always a surprise. They're thrilled. They're chamatkara, we call it at the discovery of something previously concealed. In fact, aesthetic sensibility is nothing but a capacity of wonder, more elevated than the ordinary one. See, the enjoyment is nothing more than other than the incomparable thrill of delight, because our consciousness expands. You see, this is Abhinav Gupta's interpretation. See, joy means There is no hindrance, your consciousness expands. Sorrow means, because of Chanchilya, it shrinks. That's why Abhinavagupta says in certain Tantric rituals, ritual dance, outsiders are not allowed. Because you will hinder the participants' enjoyment. See, when you are having a birthday party, surely somebody else, you don't do the birthdays. Whether the guest must go and find to do the birthdays. But otherwise, you are a bit disturbed. Everybody knows everybody else, and you feel at home. Also in rituals, very much. So this idea is given up very much in Abhinavagupta's Tantric philosophy. And I give several examples, I don't want to go into detail into that. But then, it's a very. Now, why do I say this? The hermeneutic principle, now we come back to the ninth one, appreciation of beauty and sensitivity to beauty will sharpen the senses that shuns the ugly. Keen sense of justice to recognize also its opposite, injustice. Whereas if a trained person will see the ugliness, but I'm not blaming the aesthetically sensitive and curiosity. There are so many things ugly going on. But the other sociological factors I'm going to it. The man who is sensitive to come on. As artists can perceive, artists is sensitivity in that sense. So Brahma, the term Vipatti here, that's used by Andhra, he says Preeti, delight, and Vipatti are two sides of the same experience. One who is experiencing the aesthetic delight definitely is transformed. Some changes take place. Vipatti is to say the result that you are enjoying aesthetic pleasure. So Gadamer, the German philosopher, he expressed this truth differently. He says experience of art is a mode of self-understanding. Whenever we interpret art, we interpret ourselves. You see? This whole discussion on that. Only creating art, the point we are making that what Dhwani implies is not unknown to other cultures. Or what the West means is not unknown to other cultures. That's my point. The functional similarity I'm talking about. Now, related to this, I found a passage. What's the goal of this? Why do we talk about Dhwani at all? What's all these hermeneutic principles? This reformation, training, education. What Abhinavagupta repeats at least 3 times I discovered in his text, in his Sulochana, in his commentary. He says, Agama and Shastra are owned by a teacher. They speak like a master. Do this, don't do that. If you want to go to heaven, reform, do this, no sacrifice. That kind of no master. And then, but Irihasas, Achyas, namely the philosophy, the history, all those things, teach you like your friend with arguments, trying to persuade you, do this, etc. But then Kavya it pokes the reader like a beloved. He says more persuasive than other things. 3 times at least Abhinavagupta refers to this. What is implied in these analogies is that all the 3 forms of text communicate and evoke a response, which is a formative process. This process presupposes 2 things: one form of experience, of delight and awareness, and a specific structure of language that mediates this experience, namely Kavya, literature, poetry, art, painting, pretty, sculpture, whatever it is. Now, I'm just giving you a quotation from the topic, Outlook Topic 2007. Just please read the text. Education is not simply a producer of wealth, it is a producer of citizens. So citizens need freedom of mind, and so to be trained as to ask tough questions, to analyze what they need for accuracy, logic, and comprehensiveness, to reject specious reasoning and shoddy historical argument, to imagine alternative possibilities, to think what it might be like to be in the shoes of a person different from themselves. These skills are crucial for democracy. They are skills associated with humanities and the arts like philosophy, history. They are utterly neglected. Rote memory is the method of the hour, and the imagination is viewed with suspicion. So mark on the spot, never mind who this person is. But this is published in our journal. So I think there is something pertinent I thought. So I brought this quotation here. Now, I'm summing up the second part of it. When the functional similarity, will repeat what I said. Dhwani is not to be identified with symbol, differences, nuances, but each concept is valid only within the particular culture. You can't grab onto something else. So, but there is a functional similarity. What symbol does in the Western worldview, Dhwani fulfills in the Indian worldview. That's my point. Okay? Raymond Panikar calls it homomorphic equivalence. identifying the functional similarities is one way of building bridge between cultures. Okay. Now I go to the third part, is rather provocative. I hope you don't mind if I do that. Not friendliness. See, today, human reality is split up into various cultures and subcultures, of which the sociological dominant one are mainly the technological civilization, the pan-economic system, and the third one the so-called Western reality. Okay? Due to sociological historical reasons, people from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, by and large, are forced to adapt the main categories and basic assumptions of these three cultural patterns as the only means for survival and even for any possible interaction with other cultures. These patterns are generally accepted by leading political institutions, minorities, without sufficiently taking into account the far-reaching consequences of such concessions and without considering whether there are other alternatives at all. People are taking in easily without seeing. The indiscriminate adaptation of methods alien to a culture will not produce the expected results. Even if it does, we would displace the deepest archetypes or the basic patterns of other cultures, lead to dispersion, disruption, and confusion. The other cultures of the world seem to be giving way to modernity, even in the name of Western thinking, but we cannot assume there is no alternative at all. You see? Perhaps the Western countries that have gone further along in this line, they may not like this. They may be more sensitive to alternatives than other countries. But then we desperately need to attain a certain economic stability. So we need to have import supercomputers. In short, a universal human participation group. When I was talking functional similarity, there was a participation also from other cultures. You see? Now, technology civilization, you know what I mean. See, it's not only I'm against this technology that we import, but the mindset. It assumes, it also changes your mind or emotions. That's precisely the point I'm trying to make. The pan-economic system. See, we all accept it. Why they are quantifying everything? Our love is quantified. Even third world is calculated in terms of economic terms. You see, this is what pan-economic system. The third one, the Western way of life, is the main source of inspiration for the current world order. You see, that's there. You see. Now, even to diagnose this, I'm using the sympathetic system. Today, I'm also using the strategy. I'm not out of it. This is irony of what I'm saying now. Now, we cannot consider the cultures of Asia, Africa, and Latin America as mere apprentices. That ability, Western culture, is a function and responsibility of intellectuals to seek radical alternatives and present real possibilities. You see, obviously, new methods of interpretation are needed. The cross-cultural studies offer the possibility of mutual recognition and positive symbiosis. Now, what I use in metaphor, an example. Technology is like a Trojan horse. You know the Trojan horse? The moment the Trojan horse comes inside, in its bosom, all the other things are there. This is what technology does. Let me give you an example. Take an example, electric mixer. Okay? Now, the whirling and slightly vibrating, it makes juice from solid fruit in less than no time. Okay? Obviously. Wonderful tool. Okay? It seems to be. But a quick look at the car wall socket reveals what we have before us is rather a domestic terminal of a national, indeed worldwide system. The electricity arrives via a network of cables and overhead utility lines, which are fed by power stations that depend upon water pressures, pipelines, and tank assignments, which in turn require dams, offshore platforms. The whole chain on which guarantees an adequate and prompt delivery if every one of its parts is manned by armies of engineers, planners, and financial experts who themselves fall back on their administration, universities, indeed entire industries, sometimes even the military. See? As with a car, a tablet, a computer, and a television, the electric mixer, is dependent on the existence of sprawling, interconnected system of organization and protection. Whoever flicks a switch is not using a tool. Is plugging into a combine of running systems. You see? However, innocent they appear to be, the products of the modern world only function as long as large parts of society behave according to this plan. You see? You accepted the whole system. It's not a tool, it's not just an aid. You are borrowing the whole thing. Your way of thinking changes, your emotions changes. You see? Now, this is a trick. Like Indra's, in fact, Vedic Indra is a cunning god, He has got this Maya Jala, this magic net illusion, very alluring, like the particulars computers they are using, very shiny, attractive, so nice, If I don't have that, I'm missing something, I'll be pushed aside as a humanist, you see. Nobody will make my talk, he doesn't know how to present my presentation. I don't know how to ask the students to prepare that. If I can't resist it. The temptation is so alluring, see? If I yield to it, then I have to complete my mind, you see? My spontaneity is gone, I'm tied down to this, you see? I'm not spontaneous to speak, you see? In the name of some famous, some database, we are sacrificing many of our voluntary spontaneous lifestyle, you see? So I'm just giving an example how this can happen. Why do I see this? See, the point is, with all our respect, what happens is, you cannot really adopt the Western lifestyle. Each one of the Indian cities, you cannot have 40 quadrat square house. It's impossible. That lifestyle doesn't go. But now, what's the solution to it? Because there is something that goes with it. Because in the objective data, why I say this, the technology cannot establish itself without planting its roots in the soil and subsoil. It's not by chance that technology developed in the Mediterranean landscape. There's a package deal. The Christian desire to save the world, the Greek desire for knowledge, the pragmatic vision of reality combined together. That also occurs took another form, namely in the white man's world, civilizing the whole world, Heidegger's task of Europeanizing the whole world, the American dream of Americanizing the whole world comes along as a package deal. You see, this is all expressed. It's published text. I'm not cooking up anything. The well-known phrase Europeanization of Earth is Heidegger's phrase. Even Husserl used it. That was their dream. Because they have superior culture. The others, straightly up, I'm not into this view, Kant, brilliant mind, no doubt about it. He says, quoting David Hume, his predecessor, British, he's a racist. He says, look, the mere fact somebody is from head to foot is black is a proof enough that he has no character. Can you believe such a statement? Who says? He can't say. So this is all a particular system. This way they treat us, as shit. What happened in the whole history. Now the point is very important. Last point, namely, my project is look for alternative thinking. You see, what are alternatives possible? Can we change system from inside? No, we can't change. They are all inside. If they try to jump over our own shadow, we will succeed. Can we change them outside? We can't. Because the system in itself is not evil or bad, but then we are also part of the system. Now, should we react? No. Reaction means confrontation, fight. Because that means you have to use the same weapons that opponents are using. And one who hates becomes what it is. What one hates becomes inside. Unless we rise superior level, we have to end up repeating the long karma. That's why that also will not help. So what next? The only possibility, as I see it, is namely to have this mutual fecundation of conscious interactions. All those concepts are important. It's human rights. They never took into account the concept of man from India. It's a Western concept of man. See? We need to participate. I don't think it's the Chinese concept of man. So you need to participation in the global culture. Otherwise we will react, rebellious, subjugated. The wrong way will not succeed. Everybody is important in that one. Why? The problem is, today, no one culture no one religion, ideology, tradition is self-sufficient. Gone are the days some religions claim they have an answer for all. Impossible. Can you solve the problem of poverty with just one community? One? No. Can you have peace in the world with just one country? No. All have to cooperate. So we need, when one ship is sinking, keep all the other boats nearby to help. So we need collaboration, dialogue. That's why the point I'm driving at is that we need to have a collaboration. We need to interact. We need to bring in this. That's why the task of our intellectuals to find out what are the homeomorphic equivalents, functional similarities concept. Just we always say that. We don't have anything to offer. We don't have anything. We'll say, Salam, yes, okay. But if we don't know our own tradition, we are not know our own text, then we'll be speechless, we'll be angry, but we have no answer. It's partly our responsibility, intellectuals of this country, to know our tradition and find our several problems. See, when I presented this once, published article, the American scholar dismissed my book in one sentence. It is perverse, he said. My interpretation is perverse. Of course, I quickly replied to him, because it depends which, area you are looking at, you are prejudice. I'm Indian, I know what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that we are, see, the trouble is, there is some resistance. Another problem I had, another article I wrote on conscience, conscience Western concept. I was trying to look for some Indian equivalent, conscious similarity. When we read Manusastra, chapter 2, verse 6, there are 4 sources of morality, I put it in Western language, namely, why do you do this? Because my scripture says, Bible says, Quran says, Veda says, but because scripture, because Shruti. Suppose Shruti doesn't get everything, then it goes to tradition. Suppose that also you don't find anything. You take example of great people, take Gandhi, suppose you don't find anything, what happens? Then the word used your own conscience. The word used by Manu is Atma-Drishti, which Western scholars translate as inner satisfaction. Literally it's correct, but it's not conscious what you mean. See, the trouble is, they don't want to accept it. Even Vivekananda, in his book, he translates only inner satisfaction. It doesn't bring in the concept of conscience. So my point is, later on, the Mimamsakas in the 6th, 7th century, there are 2 schools of Mimamsaka, Pataka school, they took the question. And they define what is Atma-Drishti. And strangely enough, they quote the example of Kalidasa's Abhinaya Shakuntalam, where Dushyanta, after falling in love with Shakuntala, then he thinks a moment, now is it fit for me, proper for me to make love to this woman? And he could not find any guidance. He was alone, except his conscience. And he was calm, and he said, yes, you can do it. Atma-Drishti is used. And Mimamsakas quote this example. To begin with, it came what is this. When I wrote this article, they dismissed. I'm not just a fanatic. So I'm just struggling to find a series of functional similarities, explain. I'm trying to collaborate. I'm not saying mine is superior. No, that's not the point. We need to have means of recognition. Try to offer alternative thinking, alternative concept, richness. Only then we the participants in the general dialogue. Otherwise, we learn secrets. That is not fair to us. That's why I can give several examples that whole lot of them. See, today, for example, people say Indians don't have any sense of history. Is it true? Albert said that will go on repeatedly. Come on, let's face it. Is it true? It makes no sense. What they mean is that Indians don't have a text in Sanskrit about Indian history, blah, 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 maybe. But they not even classified our text, you see. We do translation. Erasmus has a project of Catalogorum. Rather started, it's 8 years, not complete, we are still cataloging the catalogs, we do translation, you see. And that's not my point. See, just an example. We perform it was differently. Is it true that we have a sense of the past? I give an example, if you don't mind today. See, in the Sanskrit, to read Tamil, there are several forms of past tense in the classical language. If you don't have a sense of the past, why do there are several forms of past tense? Imperfect tense, go, body, what? See? That means the person is a witness to the event, imperfect. You got perfect tense, bahua, where you are not present. Then you got aorist, a second aorist, you are perfect. So we have in Greek Latin, they have this Sanskrit. They show, my linguistic proof is that the Indians had a sense of the past. One dancer student came to me. She wanted to choreograph, but she didn't get this famous character in Mahabharata. She could not read the Sanskrit. She came to me. I read the text with her. You see, where they use Abhavat, where the Bahuva, very consistent. So it means they had a sense of the past, you see. So every kind of textbook available now, this is a different kind. So let's not swallow immediately what the thing given there, but we must be based on our own text, our own tradition. Only we can talk about it. Of course, we can talk endlessly on this. I don't know, I've gone beyond the time given to me. Now, if you have any question to ask, any clarification, feel free to ask in Tamil or in English or whatever language that I can answer. Thank you so much.
If your questions can be very short and crisp, that will be well. Thank you.
Thank you for an excellent lecture, Doctor. There's one slightly, actually it's actually some sort of a seeking of info. Coming to the Indian context, we have this several stories about the sacrifice or the concept actually, like Karna or that Chola king. You know, this concept, because I noticed that you are well read in several languages and obviously you must be doing all the classics. This concept per se, you know, like chivalry is well known, love is known, beauty is known and all that. But this concept, is it there? I don't know whether it's still coming across. I'm talking in specific reference to supreme sacrifices, like a couple of instances which said, like Karna giving his own dharma as donation. Or as some sort of a gift or something. I'm talking the idealistic concept of, what shall I say, sacrifice combined with charity, combined with grace. This concept, is it there in any of the other literatures?
In other literature? Yes. See, every concept has a specific way of developing a particular culture. The same thing will not be found elsewhere. But as I said, it is. Whatever you find in the Western culture, we find some shade of it in Indian culture. The other way about it is true. Because a long culture like Indian culture, which has many traditions, Western cultures, definitely have. So it's not developed in the way we have formulated, illustrated. So, just for a general question, that much I can answer. Sacrifice, you see, it has developed in a specific way in the Vedic context, you see. The sacrifice, what is meant there, you see, it's different. In fact, it comes even in the Nadi Shastra, in a particular context, very interesting. The first chapter of Nadi Shastra, word drama is like a yajna. See, the theatre performance is like yajna. The rishis perform yajna with painful things and attain moksha, but you can also reach moksha by performing the fifth Veda, Nadi Shastra. In that context, the end of the first chapter of Nadi Shastra, possibly yajna. So it discusses different contexts, different what context we are talking about. Even the Indian context is so varied. So we cannot give a general answer unless we specifically know what you say about the Rigveda says that, or Nadi Shastra says that, or Gita says that, and we can answer. And otherwise, too general discussion will not lead to anything.
No, I mean the Western. No, my point is,
Yes.
usually ideals are bravery, beauty. The standard definitions are there.
See,
But in the Western literature, in the Western civilization which you're talking of, this specific, I think I'm not coming through clearly. The concept, as a concept, is this a couple in folklore and in classics, this should have been reflected. Like there are so many incidents that have been reflected in Indian classics. Is there any equivalent in the Western culture?
in the Christian tradition, Jesus death on the cross of this was sacrifice par excellence. Sacrifice. So the word is used, and the whole liturgy is centered around that. But not in the way it is developed here. The idea definitely is there. Definitely. But it's developed in a specific Judeo-Christian context. Not see the Jewish understanding of sacrifice is different from what the Christians understand of the death of Jesus. So definitely there is a concept. Sure.
Once again, sir.
You said a question, you should also have at least a trace of premonition about the answer that is going to come. In the same breath, you also said that you should be prepared for a wonder or a surprise on the answer being given. I feel it is mutually inconsistent, or my comprehension is incorrect.
But once again, I didn't get the question.
You said, I mean, raise a question.
Yeah.
You should also have a trace of premonition about the answer that's going to
Some
come.
idea about what implies.
That's what I said, premonition, a trace of premonition of the answer that's going to come. At the same time, when the answer is given, you said you should have a thrill and wonder. Are they not, I mean, at least, do not have a trace of inconsistency?
There is no contradiction here, you see. But then the answer that comes, it is already there. It's a revelation, discovery for me. That's why it's a surprise, you see.
So why is it a wonder?
Wonder, because that I have not foreseen. The wonder means the English word is so confusing, you see. It's a
Oh,
surprise.
you said surprise.
A thrill, you know.
Thrill.
Thrill. You can use
If I
different
have a
words.
premonition,
Yeah.
is the question of coming.
Now, premonition means I don't know exactly, I gave the philosophical use of the word, but especially context what Abhinavgupta points out is in Chamatkara. Rasa, for example, is a Chamatkara, the word he uses that, you see. And he's trying to bring all the parallels of Kashmiri side of philosophy to this. You see, it's a surprise when we discover something which I have not foreseen. You see, supposing you raise the point which I have not foreseen about this one discussion, it will be a surprise for me. I'm ready to accept, you see. It will be joy to know there are much more nuances than what I have been saying so far, you see. Because every time we read it, the reason is, see, the code is one thing, but the reader provides the context. Your background is different from mine. Perhaps you see something else which I don't see. When you point out, it's a surprise for me. It's a discovery for me. The same reality now looking at me. But suddenly say, look at that. I'm not discovered. I walked 100 times, I never saw that. My friend tells me, oh, I've seen this. No. Hello. So, thus, in every reality, we have this sort of discovery all the time. Because the reality is always full of evocation. So the whole world is a symbol. The whole world is a symbol. There is always evokes for those who are perceptive enough.
In other words, it's more a subjective affair than objective.
Please, it's a subjective object. See, in fact, it is subjective, obviously, but it's not completely. There are two ways of saying subjective. See, the terms can be confusing. It is a subjective. See, now, for example, I've got pinprick, I've got a giddiness, okay? It is subjective. I don't expect you to share that, okay? When I say, look, that mountain is beautiful, it is subjective, but I expect you to share that. Because it is not really subjective, it is transsubjective. You cannot see it. That's why you can train somebody, you can help me to perceive this. Come on, really beautiful. You say, oh no, I don't like it, it's different matter. But they train this other way and we perceive this. So there is a difference between the word we use in what context, you see. So it's not simply subjective, which means when you close down to being alone, it's not something universal. Otherwise we can't teach aesthetics at all, you see. We cannot teach about beauty if it's so subjective. Of course, you say, you know, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. This is one way of saying it, you see. But again, the subjectivistic outlook. In the West, there are two extremes. If you are subjectivistic thinker and objectivistic, but Thomas Aquinas, Aristotelian tradition, they will say beauty is always something objective outside. You see. It is there. Every being, every reality has a dimension of unity, beauty. So there's something outside, you see. Now, they are talking metaphysical beauty, but we are talking about aesthetic dimensions. But in Indian tradition, it is the transition between this, what is going on and between me, this dialogue. As we could Jyotiyamana, this is the whole way India conceives, not only subjective, this discussion is not part of our culture. They always say it is in the process that joy and discovery lies. This is how Anandaratna explains.
Sorry for interruption, please. First of all, my appreciation for the scintillating lecture. Incidentally, you mentioned about the sanction for morality.
Yeah.
Incidentally. I think in Purananur there is 4 lines. Immai செய்தது மறுமை காமனம் அறவிலை வழிகன் ஆயிரம் பிறரும் சான்றோர் சென்ற நெறியென ஆங்கு பட்டன்று அவன் கைமன். According to this, in very simple language, the sanction for morality is not religion, as I said, scriptures, etc.
Not the
Sanction for morality, I think J.B. Priestley has written on article. Why act rightly?
Yeah.
and different philosophers give different reasons. But ultimately, the sanction for morality is man-made. That is the great men of that society. What they decide, right or wrong, that is to be accepted. And the great men of that land. As you said, what Gandhi said may be morality here, but that may not be the morality there. What Charlie Chaplin said, instead of cleverness, we want humanity. Instead of cleverness, we want kindness. So what Charlie Chaplin said may be sanction for morality for Europe, but not for America. So the sanction for morality, is it universal, or does it change from country to country, time to time, etc.? Sanction, that is, somebody puts a question to a professor, why should I act rightly? What is the very appropriate answer that professors we can give to those people? Sanction for morality.
Several theories of it. That's not my point is I quoted an example. Did not explain that word Atmatushti. That was the context I brought in Manu. See, it's not sanction, it's the sources of morality is the word. See, for example, when you do that, somebody will say, look, my scripture says, fine. My parents say that, my elders say that, fine. It's one way to look at it. Somebody says, my reason tells me. Somebody says, I don't know at all. Somebody says, no, if I don't do it, I'll be punished by the police, so I do it. Okay? It's another argument. Somebody said, no, I do it for the good of the society. There are, depending on the answer I give, there are so many theories, pragmatic or utilitarian or this and this areas, religious ethics, etc. So these are all endlessly discussed at this point. I did not talk anything about that kind of things. I only referred to Manu. We refer to Manu because he explained that word Atmatushti, how it's interpreted, translated by other people. That's all my point. Okay? We can have a whole discussion on ethics. That's okay.
Thank you.
That was not the point. Yes. Yeah.
On the very oft-quoted, very popular quotation of the Auchitya
Yeah.
of the honeymoon of Shiva and Parvati,
Yeah.
which Abhinav Gupta, I think so, graphically did, charged Kalidasa for that one.
Anandavardhana.
Sorry, Anandavardhana. Have there been any rebuttal of his argument? Because there the Auchitya, the propriety, you put that question.
Yeah.
Will you describe the sexual intercourse of father and mother? You asked.
Yeah.
Suppose somebody says, so what? Today, in a permissive society,
Okay.
so Auchitya becomes, is it not something about that times and climes differ. So what was not permissive yesterday is permissive today, even in cinema, even in our literature. Like that, this Kalidasa also is describing, he is not describing them as father and mother. For him, the heroic, the couple, even he is rather raising the level of so-called what is called as sexual intercourse to the level of something divine. Has that answer been given? Has there been any further rebuttal of that?
I do not know anybody refuting this argument. Okay? I do not know literature. You are right, today things are changing. They are not following what Matheshastra says. So definitely the situation changes, context changes, people are born in today's context indifferently. Why not? Sure. I am not going into discussion on that. Because to illustrate my text also about 9th century text. Anandavardhana lived in 9th century wrote this. Now I cannot universalize the I'm only trying to find out how we can take some hints, elements to develop certain functional similarity with other countries. Same thing happens also in the West. They are not repeating what happened in the 1920s, after the World War. What happened is not what is happening today in American society or European society.
Particularly in Auchitya, it has been a sea change all over the world.
All over the world. Change.
You have only 2 more questions, please.
Yes, he was talking about Dhwani, part 1 and part 2. And later on, part 3, he spoke about the influence of the other cultures,
Alternative way of thinking.
submerging our own culture. I mean, pardon me for my own limited understanding. I'm not able to see how you linked up these two things, how you proceeded from Dhwani to this, question of mixing of the cultures. I mean, I don't know whether it's a two different ideas you're trying to present, or there is some sort of a link which I have failed to perceive or understand.
It's good that you clarify this, because otherwise I missed the purpose for which I gave this talk. See, the point is, I took Dhwani and symbol as an example of intercultural things. I'm trying to show how mutual fecundation, call it. Namely, there is a common, what symbol does in the Western countries, Dhwani does in Indian context. So what type of a symbol is not unknown in other cultures. I brought in this. Because why my whole search is to find alternate way of thinking. Otherwise we become only a technocratic society as we have nothing to contribute from our culture, our tradition, our literature. So I was trying to find some examples to my knowledge. I'm not expert in every aspect of Indian culture. So from what I did, I thought few elements. It is not one man's task. All of us should try to see what we can offer with this local participation. We should also take part in discussion on human rights, in discussion on economic issues, etc. But we don't have anything specific to contribute from our side. Otherwise, we follow from the other side, we will be left out. That was my concern. One is only one example, a small example, may not be the big one, that happened to be there. But major project for me will be to find alternative way of thinking, finding our own concept or conceptual clarifications or some rituals, other ways, so that we could dialogue, we could be equal partners. Otherwise, our culture will become appendix to other cultures, which will create a lot of confusion, a certain amount of complex. That's my idea. Maybe I'm wrong, you don't have to agree with me. This is the way I was trying to link. I mean, clear what I was trying to do is that confusion state. That's right. Yeah, that's it. Only trying to find it.
I'll make this very brief. So you said Dhwani goes beyond the intention of the author. So I remember one page, I'm using the word Dhwani very loosely, like art. So the very famous artist Rene Magritte, he drew a pipe and he said it's not a pipe. So if you think it's a pipe, it will be wrong. So where is that boundary of does the meaning of Dhwani go beyond? You said beyond the author. So where is that boundary that stops? Is there a boundary?
There is take artwork, it's a good example you gave. An artwork and the reader, okay? It's a dialogue between this. Now I cannot say whatever I want, say on this is so, because the artwork has its own grammar. I cannot violate that. I must respect the context in this particular poetry or painting is unlike. The same way, the painting also cannot evoke anything in me, because I am also limited. My preparedness, my subtlety is also limited. So somebody else will see more than what I see that. Because that the pattern of that reader is much more enriched in their mind. So it's a both-based control, you see. Namely, the reader also controls the text to some extent. The text also controls the reader to some extent. Thus, you have to find a balance. It's always, there's no limit. We don't talk about the limit. It's always, people read poems, go for theater, again they can see some movies, why? Every time it's stimulating, inspiring. They find fascinating. Some people have seen the film so many times. Some people have seen the painting several times. You see. Why? Because they find even tragedy so appealing. They go again and again. They enjoy it. So it's all, because what he paints not necessarily universally acceptable to others. You may not see the way I see it, because I am also limited. My background is limited. I could see only this much. They have to be shared in a shared context. It becomes a richness of the community, a heritage of the country. See, as you read all those literature, writings, and we say this is our treasure, this is our heritage. We call it. Not one man wrote it. All writings put together is our culture. What is culture after all? See?
Can we say that dancing Shiva is a symbol of Dhwani?
Shiva Nataraja. Oh, Shiva, definitely. Dhwani is at work. Sure. Dance definitely is the
whole symbol, the drummer room, fire, each and every part.
Definitely every part of it. The dance itself is simple, Dhwani is at work. Of course, you can give different meanings, different contexts. You see, Shiva is a very fascinating theme. We have got so many. All the in the Shaiva tradition, all those Panchabutas are attributes of Shiva. And we have 5 temples dedicated to each of the Panchabutas in Tamil Nadu. You know that. So, thus, definitely dance, mudra, symbol, evocative, Dhwani in that sense. Dhwani is the broader perspective. See, the whole world is reality. The whole world is evocative. Dhwani. The whole world is symbol. Then, why to eliminate this alone? Everything will be no exception.
அறையிலேயே பேச வேண்டிய நிர்பந்தத்துக்கு உட்பட்டு பேசியிருந்தாலும் கூட அமல்தாஸ் அவர்கள் முழு வெளிச்சத்தையும் நாம் எடுத்துக்கொண்டு சப்ஜெக்ட் மீது காட்சி. 2 ஆச்சரியங்கள் நமக்கு எழத்தான் செய்கின்றன. ஆனந்தவர்தனர் இவ்வளவு ப்ரொஃபவுண்டாக இருக்க முடியுமா என்ற ஆச்சரியம், அமல்தாஸ் அவர்கள் இவ்வளவு ப்ரொஃபவுண்டாக இருக்கிறாரே என்ற ஆச்சரியம். இந்த 2 வியப்புகளுடனேயே நாம் பிரிந்து செல்ல வேண்டிய நிலையில் இருக்கிறோம். நாம் முன்பே குறிப்பிட்டவாறும் அது குறிப்பிட தவறி இருந்தாலும் கூட ஃபாதர் அமல்தாஸ் அவர்கள் 30க்கும் மேற்பட்ட புத்தகங்கள் எழுதியிருக்கிறார். 60க்கும் உட்பட்ட கட்டுரைகளை பல்வேறு பீரியாடிக்கல்ஸிலும் அகில உலக வெளியீடுகளிலும் எழுதியிருக்கிறார். ஆனால் ஒன்று என்னை கவர்ந்தது, ஒரு புத்தகம் மெட்டீரியல்ஸ் இன் ராமானுஜா பிலாசபி. எழுதியவர் ஒரு ஜெர்மனாக எழுதியவர், அதை மொழிபெயர்த்து தருடையவர் ஃபாதர் அமல்தாஸ். ஸோ புத்தகத்தின் விஷயமோ ராமானுஜ தத்துவம், எழுதப்பட்ட மொழியோ ஜெர்மன் மொழி, அதை ஆங்கிலத்தில் கொடுத்தவரோ நமது கிறிஸ்தவ சமய பாதுகாப்பிய அமல்தாஸ் அவர்கள். ஸோ அவருடைய பரந்துபட்ட வீச்சுக்கும் பரந்த பார்வைக்கும் உதாரணமாக இந்த புத்தகம் எழுகிறது. அவர் முடிக்கும் திருவாயில் ஒரு ஸ்டேட்மெண்ட் சொன்னார், ஆச்சரியமானது. ஒரு மதம் போதுமானது இல்லை, மறுபடியும் சொன்னார், சிங்கிள் ரிலிஜன் இஸ் நாட் எனஃப். ஒரு சமயத்தோடு நேரடியாக தொடர்பு கொண்ட, அந்த சமய வாழ்க்கையை தன்னுடைய வாழ்க்கையாக கொண்ட ஃபாதர் டாக்டர் ஆனந்த் அமர்தாஸ் அவர்கள் அவ்வளவு திறந்த மனிதராக இருப்பார் என்று பார்க்கும்போது நமக்கு ஆச்சரியமும் ஒரு விதமான சிந்தனை எப்போதும் நம்பிக்கை ஏற்படுகிறது. ஸோ அவருடைய இந்த ஆனந்தவர்த்தனையும் அபிநவப்பட்டனை ஓரளவையும் சேர்த்து அந்த துவனி என்ற சற்று கடினமான, சற்று நமக்கெல்லாம் புதிய, எங்களை போன்ற சிலருக்கு புதிய விஷயத்தை மறுபடியும் சிந்திக்க தூண்டுமாறு ஒரு கருத்தரங்கத்திலே மட்டுமே கிடைக்கக்கூடிய மொத்த தொகுப்பான சிந்தனைகளை நமக்கு ஒரே ஒரு மாலை தீர பகுதியில் வழங்கியமைக்காக நான் உங்களுக்கு சம்பிரதாய ரீதியாக மட்டும் மனப்பூர்வமாகவே நன்றி கடமைப்பட்டிருக்கிறோம். எங்களுடைய மகிழ்ச்சியை தெரிவிக்கும் முகத்தான் உங்கள் சார்பாக ஒரு சிறு அன்பளிப்பை.
Thank you once again. I enjoyed sharing with you. It's also an occasion to think further. Otherwise, in all these thoughts, I would not put in this order, but for this invitation from friends here, that you are patiently listening to it and responding to it. Thank you for all the questions you raised. Every question also creates certain number of further vibrations in me.